So, dann passend zum Release, Chris Metzen on the Word Soul Saga.
I didn't think Zerglings, morphing into orcs would work, but
No, I didn't either.
it's been a privilege working on Zerg-orcs.
Hi, I'm Scott
Zerg-orcs?
Johnson, the host of the World of Warcraft podcast, The Instance, and today I'm sitting here with Chris Metzen. Chris,
Scott, it's good to see you, man.
good to see you. How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's a crazy time. We're about to launch The War Within and, really kick off this massive World Soul saga, which is a trip because, I haven't shipped a video game in, 8 or 9 years. So it's kind of wild going through this process again and
Wild.
just kind of feeling that anticipation, excited to see what people think. And when the product finally gets into people's hands, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole development process.
Well, let me ask you this question because you reminded me of how long this has been going. I remember firing up the World of Warcraft OG vanilla World of Warcraft and seeing a trailer that said celebrating 10 years of Warcraft. And I remember then thinking, you got to be kidding me. That's insane. That's how long I've been playing these games. And now we're 20 years on top of that, 30 years total. That has to be a little overwhelming, especially given that you were here for most of that, had a bit of a break, now you're back.
Vielleicht auch hier nochmal zur Erinnerung. Wir feiern dieses Jahr nicht nur 20 Jahre World of Warcraft, sondern auch das 30-jährige Bestehen quasi vom ganzen Universum Warcraft. Also seit damals alles angefangen hat, auch mit Warcraft 1 und so. Und deswegen sind ja auch viele Events geplant. Also ich denke mal so Crossovers mit den anderen Blizzard-Spielen, auch viele Ingame-Events und ich habe auch schon gehört, statt der BlizzCon soll es dieses Jahr irgend so eine Show, Livestream, whatever, speziell für WoW geben, wo dann wahrscheinlich auch schon die nächsten Inhalts-Updates vorgestellt werden, die nächsten Content-Patches.
Does that weigh on you? Do you feel the heat from the time? Like, how do you feel about how that entire process has gone?
I don't feel kind of heat or like the weight of time, relative to expectation. It's really weird, being a little older, a little wiser. Feels like 100 years ago, feels like 5 minutes ago, all at the same time. So when I look at this World Soul Saga, the stuff we're building right now, thankfully there's an immediacy of it all to me. It's just, we live and die by, how good, the things we're sculpting in real time is. Trying to hold it all in your head, the weight of the past, it's kind of beyond me. I can't really wrap my head around like all the history all at once. I mean, there's kids graduating college right now named Jaina and Anduin. It's like, what? I often find it's not all that helpful to overdwell on, in the course of development. You want to keep it focused on what you're doing at the time. So that's how I try and balance it out. One day I'm sure I'll look back and go, wow. Working on this game again has really given me more of an immediate sense of gratification that just kind of keeps you focused in the moment. And that's generally, where my head is at on a day-to-day basis.
When you mentioned people naming their kids after characters that you created, that you named, and that you developed and saw grow and evolve and everything. Something that's interesting about War Within so far, to me, is we're seeing the gang kind of back together in a much more complete way. So you're seeing Anduin talking to Thrall with Jaina nearby, and Khadgar, my favorite worst wizard of all time, but I love him. He's there. They're all there. Yeah. And what that tells me is that we're in for some coming together of a lot of strings, a lot of stuff that has been out there for 20 years.
Wie er nickt.
In some meaningful ways.
He knows.
Speak to that a little bit.
I'll break it down. When I came back, I'm like, all right, let's go. World of Warcraft. Like, what do we got? What are we making? And they were in, they had already been doing War Within, or what would become, War Within, for about 10 months. While I liked what they were building and thought it was a cool next chapter in WoW, in my head, I'm like, for the 20th anniversary of WoW, like, I want to have a feeling, like, whatever the product becomes, I want to have a feeling of pulling all the toys out of the toy box, right?
Das ist aber interessant. Macht doch Sinn. Die arbeiten ja quasi immer, ne, das ist ja schon seit jeher so, die arbeiten ja quasi schon, während wir unsere Dragonflight-Erweiterung zum Beispiel haben, schon an der nächsten und entwickeln vielleicht auch schon die ersten Ideen zu der übernächsten Erweiterung. Dass Chris Metzen da noch gar nicht am Start war zu dem ganzen The War Within-Prozess, ist natürlich auch interessant. Und er kam dann wieder zurück und hat so gesagt, yo, wie können wir das alles noch viel größer und epischer gestalten, ne?
Older characters, the kind of macro themes that, the series has been about all these years, Titans, Old Gods, Light and Dark. I wanted to feel like the anniversary was capturing, like this kind of mix of all of the core flavors. And ultimately proofing out that there has been this storyline all the way through, that everything kind of converges into this crescendo. And in a very real way, how the War Within was shaping up, they're like, yeah, dude, like there's no way on earth, right? That that's going to divert the course of Mighty Rivers. There's no way to get that done on top of what we're already in production on. So that begat this idea of a larger saga. I'm like, okay, well, what if we can get there in X number of steps? What if we can build to something just ridiculous, but it might take a couple expansions to do. And somehow folks, bought in on it, like, whoa, that's wild. Let's go. And so Taryn Gregory and I, Taryn's our, principal story developer. So we work together every day, and we talk a lot about, like, we want to involve all these epic characters, but like when they're in the scene, they eat all the oxygen and they could just go off and solve for X. So it's this balance between including all these mega characters and then finding clever ways to get them out of the way, so that the player has maximum agency and the newer characters we're introducing have space to breathe and live.
It sounds like it is almost an advantage to come to something that had already been started. If you'd come to the end of Dragonflight and started from there, that's a little big, it's a bigger buy. It's like, well, wait a minute, where are we going now? We've been flying, okay, what does that mean? What do we do? And instead, you were presented with some beginnings, and then you got to decide where those beginnings took you.
And vector it a little bit, the trick to, after all these years, creative direction, which even today, I don't know that I could do a thesis on, right? Creative direction is as unique as the person doing it and the chemistry of the team that you're working with. But kind of finding that balance again of having strong ideas and kind of saying, like, I want to go this way, right? But the team had already been, kind of constructing this thing. So it's a mix of maximizing kind of the things that they are most passionate about, the ideas that they're kind of dug in on, and finding a way to bend everything towards a singular purpose, but boosting their sense of ownership.
So when you got up on stage at BlizzCon, it was pretty magical for players.
Der legendäre
I
Auftritt.
can say that for myself, and a lot of people that I know, and a lot of fans of the game saw this as a return to something. And I think we're coming off an excellent expansion in Dragonflight. But you got up and did something that surprised everybody, which was, we're not doing the normal, here comes the next expansion, here are the features, here's the storyline in its basic way. We are going to do a trilogy of essentially games. You spoke a lot about bringing, tying up some loose ends, but also creating a saga that is 3 parts, at least, and setting up really the next 20 years of the game, perhaps. That's very different than what any of you have done up to this point. Did that present unique challenges to the way you wanted to create story, the way you wanted your characters to progress, these sorts of things?
Yeah, it created all sorts of complexities.
Hey, man.
Under the hood a little bit, it's interesting in how, when I came back on the team, the development process and even the conceptualizing process, like where does the expansion take place? What are the main themes? What's the focus? Really had become much more democratized, right? And people were, had kind of found their voice in the balance of all the special teams that comprise the World of Warcraft team. They'd really built the vision of Dragonflight together. So as I came back in, woohoo, and there were folks going like, oh wow, how is this going to change our dynamic? In terms of being a creative director, like, will we still have a voice? Will we still have stakes in how this all shapes out? So, like I was saying earlier, kind of learning that again and learning that balance again, and coming in as creative director and be like, no, I'm not here to be hyper prescriptive with everything as I might have been as a younger dude, but like really listening for the team's instincts. Like, what are they responding to? What do they want to build? What do the artists want to make? What are they imagining in terms of that pure vision? So on top of that, the complexity of, I don't think this gives up the ghost on anything. Like, we're building 3 of these at a time. This is, yeah, I'll say it. It's insane. It's insane, right? On top of the team, you know, over a year ago, having committed to like an 8-week cadence. Yeah. So these folks are, we are moving so fast, you know, and so the difference here is, you know, guys like Taryn and I have to map out where we're going like way ahead of the caravan, which is its own really interesting kind of work, right? You know, checking in with everybody. Does this feel cool? Everybody hip, you know? I want to make sure that we're building things that, you know, not only, again, my instinct feels are cool and fun, but that the team is proud to build and that they feel they have a voice in and, you know, can express themselves through where the story's going, what the ideas are. We're already mapping out, you know, whatever, you know, 13.1 and 13.2 and how they actually play out and connect, and it's wild. But
Davon hatte ich schon gehört. Ich wusste jetzt nicht, ob die das in dem Interview gesagt haben, aber da haben wir die Antwort. Was die Story angeht, also so der rote Faden quasi, der steht schon. Und das ist ja auch schon mal ein guter Anfang. Die Story, wie quasi die ganze Weltenseelen-Saga zu Ende gehen soll, die steht schon im Groben und Ganzen. Und danach kann man sich ja dann richten. Also das ist eigentlich schon echt eine gute Vorlage. Wenn zumindest hier, ne, die ganzen Entwickler der Story, wie Chris Metzen, jetzt schon wissen, aha, was soll in Patch 13.1 passieren? Und überlegt mal, die Erweiterung kommt, glaube ich, erst 2028. Ich glaube, ja, müsste hinkommen. 2028 so, da müssten wir dann beim 3. und letzten Teil sein, The Last Titan. Vorher kommt ja noch Midnight. Und jetzt haben wir ja gerade erstmal The War Within.
In a way, you get to step back and see a far more cohesive vision and a, you know, far more refined idea over time. So, and without, you know, again, without, you know, spilling any beans, it's like, you know, we're already talking about, you know, the next few, you know, post, you know, upwards of like 17.
What?
And it's just keeping the...
Was? Was für 17? Moment. Du willst mir jetzt erzählen, die machen schon Pläne bis zur 17. Erweiterung? Was ist denn das? Alter.
Honestly, we're already talking about, you know, the next few, you know, post, you know, upwards of like 17. It's just
17.
The conveyor belt going, you know,
Geil.
we're loud and clear, you know, the fans want more content, you know, more regularly. So, in a way, just staying ahead of that curve and making sure that everything, again, is of purpose and telling this much longer story. It's been a blast. You know, the creative, the pure creative on Warcraft, you know, for the past year and a half has been, how would I put it, over such a long span of time. I want to say it's one of the most nuclear creative phases I've seen for Warcraft. But the pace is wild.
Alter, was zum Teufel, Junge. Ohne Witz. Also, das ist echt crazy. Wir sitzen noch mit 70 hier rum. Junge, das ist einfach krank. Du kannst mir nicht erzählen, dass die schon jetzt Ideen haben für, keine Ahnung, die nächsten 7 oder 10 Erweiterungen, die nach The Last Titan kommen, ey. Da kannst du ja auch genauso gut dann ein WoW 2 ankündigen. Aber anscheinend wollen sie dran festhalten. Das Game wird einfach immer weiterentwickelt. Samstag 20 Uhr dann Twink zusammenleveln. Muss ich schauen. Samstag bin ich eventuell nicht da. Da bin ich schon verplant. Sorry.
Right, like the pace is wild, and it's like I ain't 30 anymore, so we joke around all the time, like, oh, you know, we need to start instituting, you know, company naps in the middle of the afternoon for the old folks. But it has been pretty amazing.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Speaking of personal connections to characters and story, somebody close to you, who I think is a very wise human, once said, online somewhere, that Chris is Anduin in some ways, kind of worn out, beaten up by a straight period of like nonstop work, right? But also on the other end of it, he's a little bit back to being Thrall again. And those two characters represent these two parts of who this person is. How much of these characters moving forward or even in the past have represented you where you were in your life? Like some people say, well, the early versions of these characters are they were so metal. Like even Tauren chieftains, they look like, these metal dudes and everything. And now they're aging, right? They're maturing. They're moving on in the world. Like you are, like everyone who's worked on this does. Like, that's time. Do you think that's a fair thing to say, that we'll see these characters change and evolve in the same way that maybe you have, and that they're kind of your avatars?
Yeah, no, I know where you're going. So there's kind of an A and a B there. Like the B, which is easier, is certainly we want to push these characters forward. We want to show some aging. We are currently doing that.
Anduin.
But yeah, we talk about that a lot. There are many new characters over the arc of the saga that we don't want to be just one-off. We want them to be, pals and, working together to, solve these big problems. But certainly the characters that have been around a while, we're trying to kind of find a way to capture that age up, not necessarily age out, but okay, so in that cinematic at BlizzCon, they went in and put gray streaks in Thrall's hair. I'm like, oh,
it looked great.
It got me. It's like, whoa. And just Anduin staring you down, it's like our little boys all grows up, it's
you feel for him. You're supposed to feel for him, right?
Which was the point. Yeah. But just the idea that these characters are moving through their own continuum and progressing and moving through stuff, what a trip, looking back from where we started. To the point where these are fairly fully realized characters within this setting, and it's just incredibly satisfying that way to see that progression.
Ja, dafür spiele ich ja auch sehr gerne WoW, einfach weil ich die Story und die Charaktere sehr mag und einfach daran interessiert bin, wie es sich immer weiterentwickelt. Und wenn man da mal zurückblickt auf die 20 oder sogar 30 Jahre, ist schon krass.
And certainly us as storytellers, as people, as we, it's not necessarily, it is certainly getting older, but it's also just experience over time. Big life moments, becoming parents, finding love, finding your career, all these big kind of life, hurdles. It's like, I tell folks all the time, don't be afraid to pour yourself into this stuff. Even when you're like, oh God, will the people down the hall dig it? Will I be judged? Yes, probably. But the answer is you're an artist. Go get it. Right? Find your truth. Because often when we're pulling from a place of deeply personal experience, someone's going to feel that on the other end of the line. As you're playing the game, it's some of those themes that really matter. Whether you're a writer, quest designer, narrative folks, cinematics, the game design, everyone kind of pours themselves into their craft, and the more genuine that is, and I think sometimes the more risk you take, I think you get more genuinely affecting content. I think people feel that, they feel you in it one way or another. There are many themes embedded in the World Soul Saga, evidenced by different characters, that are very pointedly things that I think today, or I'm struggling with today, for sure. But again, I think about it in terms of as the team's creative leader, that's not the job as much. I think the job is trying to learn to call them out, and challenge them to kind of breathe their own experience into it, as opposed to pouring my own in. So it's a balance.
I assume that's what, over time, you have a character. We'll stick with Thrall for a minute. He's probably the most well-known of the Chris Metzen, and certainly voice him. So
until they find somebody better.
Until they find somebody better. Maybe you'll age out of it. I don't know. We're getting there. But no, that you've breathed enough life into that character and given them enough direction over so much time that I have to think, in a lot of cases, they start to run on their own gas. And while I'm not asking you to tell me if there's any tragedy coming at all, we're not even suggesting it here.
I have a kill list. I've got my top 12 characters. They're all going.
Why is Khadgar at the top of the list?
Hey, man.
I love Khadgar.
There's no kill list.
All right, good. But you know what I mean? You might find yourself...
LOL, wie er in die Kamera geguckt hat. Oh mein Gott, er trollt schon wieder so hart. There is no kill list. Und dann guckt er so in die Kamera. Oder doch?
They're all going.
So
Why
ein
is
Penner,
Khadgar
ey.
at the top of the list? I kid. I love Khadgar.
There's no kill list.
All right, good. But you know what I mean? You
Hey,
might find
Mann.
yourself going, well, it might be time for character X to take a character dive.
So there's no, I'm kidding, there's no kill list necessarily. But we do talk about this stuff all the time. And the only, when you start talking about knocking off main characters, it's not a small thing. And usually that is in service to, in the general story you're developing, if you really need to punctuate, dramatic stakes, the easiest thing to do is ask Lucas, blow up a planet, or, knock off a main character.
Tyrion Fordling, for example.
Tyrion.
Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
I remember that.
I'm still gripping on that one.
Yeah, that was rough. No pressure though. I'm
Cares
just saying,
about
it was a rough
Tyrion,
moment.
Alter.
Pressure.
Varian und
So we
Vol'jin
do
war
talk
fucking
about it from
traurig.
time to time, but we try
Boah,
and frame it with
die Serie.
the greatest gravity possible, and trying to be clear that this franchise has another 20 years in it. It's this big ongoing idea, and losing critical characters is costly. So it's we talk about it from time to time. I won't tell you we won't lose anybody over the arc of the saga. Those types of moments are all about establishing stakes and that emotional, engagement from the player ultimately. So,
Does it help populate the World Soul Saga as a creative place to know that over the last few years, while you were gone for much of it, the team has made a real effort or a priority out of having allied races discovered in the world that players can not only unlock but then be and might prefer over the originals or whatever. Like this additional diversity for choice seems like a really potent way to fill your world with more interesting characterization rather than just, well, it's orcs and humans and a few others.
yeah, I love it. Just old school D&D and all these options on player expression, what kind of what culture you want to be from. I love that kind of stuff. So opening that up, especially like Battle for Azeroth and the inclusion of all these new silhouettes and flavors or whatever, I thought was awesome actually. And even the ones I didn't think I would play, I wound up, I rolled a Volpera hunter, and then I consistently dress him like Robin Hood from the old Disney movie. So it's like, I
Geil.
actually really dig a lot of the flavors that have been added over time. Like it's in my opinion, the water's warm, everybody in the pool, I think WoW can stretch and grow to, encapsulate all of these flavors. I think giving players more options, more visual options is awesome. At the end of the day, I think, erring on the side of, player choice, player agency is the right move, like why you're playing this game in the first place, right? When you imprint, especially when it's your character, when you imprint on a look or a vibe or, like a vision that you connect with, it's like, go, get it.
So let's bring it full circle to what is imminent, which is the war within. Players have a lot of expectations. Some of it is based on just excitement because there is a 3-part saga coming. They're not used to that. There's a whole new structure to this. So what would you say to players who are pins and needles about this next expansion, the start of the big grand story?
As we were talking about earlier, we've never been in a situation where we've shaped the whole giddy up, all at once. So there's the adventure component of the War Within, and then there's the max level campaign, and then there's the subsequent patches. And it's all been designed to kind of play out over time. Narrative threads and sinews, kind of linking everything together. It's personally a little biased, but I think it's off the hook, right? At the end of the day, I would want people to remember it is still only, however, part one of a much larger narrative. And I would want people to look at it that way. It's meant to rise and crescendo with its own max level campaign.
Will I be expected to walk in Quest 1 and yank the sword from the planet?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would say to that, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually,
What
the
sword?
the resolution of the sword that we started with at BlizzCon, actually, that's a 13 thing. We're
Oh,
gonna build to that.
das war so klar, ohne Witz. Natürlich wird uns das Schwert noch bis Ende der fucking Weltenseelen-Saga erhalten bleiben. Überlegt mal, das steckt schon seit Ende Legion, was ja die 6. Erweiterung war. Seitdem steckt es da schon drin. Das bleibt jetzt einfach noch bis zum Ende der 13. Also bis Ende der 12. Erweiterung ist ja dann Patch 13.0 quasi. Das ist echt ein Witz, ey.
To walk in Quest 1 and yank the sword from the planet?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would say to that, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, the sword, the resolution of the sword that we started with at BlizzCon.
That sword.
Actually, that's a 13 thing. We're going to build to that, and it's a doozy.
One does not simply yank a sword from Azeroth.
I would even say you are not prepared for that moment, and leave it at that. But it is a 13 issue. Ultimately, you know, things like Xalatath, we've been doing a lot of work to kind of build her up as a very different kind of villain. She is not like a Deathwing type, you know, villain where, you know, just he's flying and burning everything and like, oh crap, you know, we're gonna, you know, like clearly he's where the storyline ends. She's built in such a way that like we're gonna be confronted by her and face her multiple times over the arc of the saga. So it's not going to be this, you know, one and done type like, oh, you know, she's the raid boss. You know, she's meant to, you know, kind of weave in and out of events over time. So that's something I would say. But definitely the sword thing sticks in my head.
Damit haben wir ja jetzt eigentlich die Bestätigung bekommen, dass Xalatath kein, also wie auch Chris Metzen schon sagte, kein einfacher Raid-Boss vielleicht am Ende der Erweiterung wird. Die wird uns auch noch die ganze Weltenseelensaga über begleiten. Die wird immer mal wieder vorkommen, die gute alte Xalatath. Aber finde ich umso besser, weil die kommt ja eh bisher als Antagonistin sehr gut an. Viele wollen ja sich lieber mit der verbünden. Und bisher finde ich die auch echt sehr interessant geschrieben, deswegen umso besser.
You know, like certain of these themes are built to play out over time. So I hope people are into that. I hope they're into, you know, a longer form engagement. Because in a way, you know, so many of our expectations kind of, you know, crystallize around like, well, wait a minute, I didn't get the full meal I was expecting in 11.0. It's not built to be that. It's built to be part one. So buckle up. You know, the ride will be, I hope, insane and insanely fulfilling. Going back to that promise of the 20th anniversary of World of Warcraft, like, I want this saga to feel like it is just the perfect crescendo of 20 years of storytelling, you know, as we said at BlizzCon.
Yeah, there is a sense that we are fulfilling something. The 20 years came and will end this November. I guess November's launch, right? Yeah, 20-year anniversary will be this November. Yeah. And there is a feeling, I can tell you from the player side, of really coming to something special. And I know that puts pressure on the team when players collectively have an idea that they think should happen, and then the team's like, well, we're kind of going a different way. But I don't know that I've felt this much positive feedback in a long time about just where things are headed. And nobody says that about a 20-year-old property usually. Usually we're like,
there's not a lot of precedent we have, right? Like that's the same contiguous project. There's plenty of game series run for 20 years, no question. But like, it is honestly a blessing and a, you know, often sometimes a hindrance. Just trying to, you know, sift through the sheer volume of all of these details. Poor Sean Copeland, right? You know, just trying to keep it all, you know, make it all make sense. But it is also its principal strength. You know, particularly because it's an MMO and a video games, because you've lived these moments. You didn't just passively watch. You didn't just, you know, read a book or watch a movie. You've lived these moments and they matter and there are stakes, you know, so as complex as it is to try and push the world forward without breaking everything that came before, which is its own kind of challenge. It's a very noble challenge, right? It's a privilege to tread water in this complexity of this setting. After all of these years, it's amazing that it's still the same stakes. It's still the same world that you've always known.
Well, there's a future I see where you're, you know, reclining in some sort of chair.
With the blanket over my knees.
Blanket over your knees, keeping you warm, and you're looking back and you're thinking...
Telling kids to stay off my lawn.
Yeah, exactly. And they're all in their haptic suits playing whatever version of WoW they have. And looking back at Grandpa's accomplishments, and I think it looks like something to be pretty proud of already. Well, I, for one, could not be more excited about this next expansion and the entirety of the World Soul Saga, and I think you and your team should be proud, and I wish you guys nothing but luck in the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much, Scott. It was good fun.
Ey, Mann. Schönes Interview. Ja, wirklich, gute Fragen. sehr interessante Einblicke, die uns da der gute Chris Metzen gegeben hat. Da wird uns auf jeden Fall einiges noch die nächsten Jahre erwarten. Das ist eigentlich auch krass, wenn du mal überlegst, oder ja, das mit älteren, mit den ersten Erweiterungen vergleichst, wie viel Content eigentlich da mittlerweile wirklich auch quasi ausgeschüttet wird. Mittlerweile ist ja WoW wirklich so konzipiert, dass für jede Art Spieler irgendwas im Spiel enthalten ist. Und damals konntest du halt eigentlich immer nur, ja, Raiden, bisschen Dailies, PvP. Also da musste, sage ich mal, jeder wirklich das Gleiche machen. Also da merkst du auch wirklich den Unterschied, wie sich das Game entwickelt hat im Laufe der 20 Jahre. Es wird halt einfach auch modernisiert und für neue Spieler mehr zugänglich gemacht. Und irgendwann wurde es halt auch dafür, finde ich mal, Zeit.